Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today. I'm Amber Duke, joined at the desk by Bofta Imam. Our first time hosting together.
I know. We've got a lot of superpower, two ladies on the desk.
That's right. You love to see it. We're going to get right into it. We have a new pope, and of course, Pope Leo XIV is a very special case in all of Catholic Church history because he's the first American pope. Cardinal Robert Prevost was born in Chicago and has spent a lot of time in Peru as a missionary.
Pope Francis made him a cardinal back in 2023, and many have tried looking into his background to decipher his theological and political stances. Most notably, you may remember that he criticized J.D. Vance and appears to lean left on issues like immigration and gun control.
Naturally, he appears to be stern on issues like abortion, homosexuality, and gender ideology. This has sparked reaction on X, notably from the right. Senior counsel at Article 3 Project, Will Chamberlain, wrote on X, "I know I have plenty of Catholic followers. I hope that Leo XIV is a great pope and a wonderful steward for the Catholic Church. But seriously, an American who publicly criticized Vance and Trump on immigration in his few public statements? Really?" Meanwhile, Daily Wire host Matt Walsh wrote, "If you aren't Catholic, then you don't believe that this pope was elected through the guidance of the Holy Spirit. So you'll troll through his Twitter feed and analyze his selection through a modern political lens, as if he was just elected to a seat in the U.S. Senate rather than the chair of St. Peter. This is why any conversation about the Pope on this site is destined to be disjointed, confused, and ultimately useless."
Senior fellow at the Brookings Institute, Norm Eisen, responded to Laura Luma criticizing the new pope. Eisen wrote on Blue Sky, "Best possible endorsement of Pope Leo."
All right, so obviously a momentous moment for Catholics. Relatively short conclave, though, just 2 days. The longest ever was 3 weeks. And I've got to say, when I saw the white smoke yesterday, there was a lot of anxiety and nerves, but also a lot of excitement. And it's a beautiful ceremony, the way the new pope walks out into that window at the Vatican and presents himself for the first time. Pope Leo choosing to wear the traditional vestments, which was really nice to see. But I know there's a lot of commentary and debate about his political views and sort of trying to fit them into the American political paradigm. So what was your initial reaction to this choice?
Well, I thought that, like it's a moment, it's a moment when you see the smoke and then there's the decision being made. I mean, it's really a beautiful sight to see, whether you believe in Catholicism or not. Just seeing this moment and the tradition being carried is beautiful. It's beautiful. And I think that there were many who expected it maybe to come from the decision to be made with somebody who was more so leaning toward from a non-superpower nation, as we've seen in the past. So this came as a surprise to some, but not to others. And I think that when we look at his work, the missionary work in Peru, the way he bounced between languages, the fluency, the peace be with you all, the message that was sent, thanking those who had chosen him and selected him, the encouragement that he gave in that moment. I think that there's so many who felt inspired. Again, whether you are a Catholic or not, I think that there was a lot to be taken from that moment.
Yeah, definitely. And as a Catholic myself, I definitely resonate with what Matt Walsh is saying of, well, if you're not Catholic and you're trying to fit the Pope neatly into, politics and particularly the American left-right paradigm, then you're kind of missing the point a little bit.
Yeah.
Popes rarely fit neatly into a right-left sort of delineation, but if you do dig into a little bit of his history, he looks to me to be pretty moderate, right? I mean, you have him expressing very socially conservative views on things like LGBT issues and trans issues, certainly abortion, and then he is more in line with Pope Francis on things like immigration,
right,
social justice, poverty, environmentalism. But I think what a lot of Catholics were excited to see was that, based on reports of his sort of public persona, is that he is very thoughtful about things that he says to the media. He is very quite thinking before he speaks in terms of giving those public statements. And that was something that a lot of Catholics were frustrated with Pope Francis about, was that he sort of spoke off the cuff and would do these gaggles where things would be misinterpreted or not translated quite the right way, which led to some confusion among churchgoers and then people outside of the Catholic Church. So that's a bit of a relief to hear that he's going to be very careful about these public words and the weight that they carry.
Well, right, and like you said, no matter what, people are going to try to take anything he's done in the past, and of course what he says in the future, and try to put it neatly into a box. But the reality is that he is probably going to be very careful with his words, and I think he also will be passionate and vocal when he needs to be, because we've seen that in the past. And so I think it'll be interesting to see where he ends up leaning toward in terms of messages he sends out. Will he continue to use something like an X? Will he go more in a traditional platform and speak to media directly? So it'll be interesting also to see how he picks up steam, in this century in terms of how he's going to get his message out.
Right, and I know conservatives were really concerned about some of the immigration views he's expressed, particularly in calling out some of the Trump administration policies, or at least the rhetoric that they use about immigrants. I do think it's important to note that there have been some recordings of homilies that he's given where he has expressed the importance of border security and solving the problem while also showing dignity to all people. So I don't think he's quite as liberal on that issue, maybe as these retweets on his X account have led some to believe, which, as a conservative Catholic gives me some cautious optimism. We always have to see how popes actually work in the context of that position, because there have been popes who have come in with one particular leaning and by the end of their tenure have changed as well. It's important that he chose the name Leo as his pope name. His predecessor with that name, Pope Leo XIII, was the author of one of the favorite prayers of modern Catholics, the St. Michael the Archangel prayer, which I'll just, for our viewers who know it, recite along, might as well, right? St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devils. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray, and do thou, O Prince of heavenly hosts, cast into hell Satan and all the evildoers who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. It's one of the hardest prayers in Catholicism.
Well, look,
it's hardcore, and people love
it.
So
I'm impressed.
Thank you.
I'm impressed.
We say it at the end of every Mass, so it's one of my favorites personally, and I know people are like to read into the choice of name for Pope, so just wanted to call that out as well.
Well, it seems that, he's going to be looking at how people are treated. I think when it comes to the immigration issue in particular, it's, okay, maybe there's border security to your point, and maybe that will be something that he's saying, okay, there's a balance with it, but how are people being treated when they are sent to their home country? How are people given due process? I think those are some things where he may or may not be vocal about. What was interesting too was some folks having fun with, is he a White Sox fan and the pizza, like kind of Chicago pizza, being that he's from Chicago. So I thought that was also fun too, because he's American, right? So there were some traditions that I think some people did have some light humor with in all of this. You know, who's he rooting for and that kind of thing. And then interviewing his family, who said that that he was someone from the very beginning. They're playing with video games, and he was serious about his faith even as a young child. So and they used to joke that he might be the Pope, and here he is.
Yeah, so. Here we are. It's a crazy moment, and I saw some people referring to him as Dub Pope, referring to Dub Bears, which is good fun too. I love to see sort of the cultural crossover with Catholicism and how people, get into it in their own way. So it was a very exciting moment, and we'll of course keep following it, see what he does. But up next, Joe Biden joined the table at The View, and he's still convinced that he could have beaten Donald Trump. We'll get into that next on Rising.
Was because I didn't want to have a divided Democratic Party.
Do you think you would have beat him?
Yeah, he still got 7 million fewer votes.
Yes.
Okay. A lot of people didn't show up.
Joe Biden stopped by The View Thursday to say he thinks he could have won against Trump last November. According to the former president, Kamala Harris only lost because of the sexist campaign run by Trump.
The former First Lady later joined her husband at the desk, and the pair were asked about that disastrous debate performance and the widespread concerns about Biden's mental acuity. Host Alyssa Farah Griffin asked about several books that outline his cognitive decline in his last year of his presidency, and that's when it seemed to go downhill for the president, who went off on a tangent and was later cut off by his wife. Take a listen.
We found ourselves unable to deal with a lot of just basic issues, and which I won't go into in the interest of time. And so we went to work. And we got it done. And, one of the things that Well, I'm
Well,
talking
and
too long.
Alyssa, you know, one of the things I think is that the people who wrote those books were not in the White House with us. And they didn't see how hard Joe worked every single day.
Well, the timing certainly of her jumping in there is interesting.
Indeed.
You don't have to be a rocket scientist to see that, and I think a lot of people watching this, Amber, and saying, call a spade, you know.
Yeah, and I'm very curious about the decision to even do media at this point. I'm not sure what positive spin they were hoping for. I mean, going on The View, which is a generally very friendly show to Democrats and the left, and then still having this moment of a sort of the mumbling and the jumbling and the not quite answering the question is not going to give any more faith to the American people that Biden was totally fine in that last year.
Well, and the reality is he has gotten a lot of slack for deciding to run again and then not getting out early enough to really give Kamala Harris a fair shot. You know, she'd had more runway. A lot of people argue, you know, we may be in a different situation. Maybe not, right? But there's certainly that perspective, and it seemed that you know, he's looking at this as maybe coming back to try to push back against some of that. Apparently, he's also writing a book. But I do think it was interesting, Jill jumping in that moment. And not to say rescuing, but there was a bit of, I sense where this might be going. And here's what I think is interesting, too. Nobody said he didn't work hard.
Right.
Nobody said that the former president didn't work hard. We know this, that being a president is an extremely tasking job. I mean, nobody is disputing that it's 24 hours a day, as she pointed out. But, you know, and then she also said, and I think it's important that, because so often people want to go around the issue, and here's the thing. She said that there weren't people who were in the White House, but how often do they talk? They talk to media, and that's how sourcing has been done since, you know, the beginning of time, right? So you don't have to be in there, and it's not just one source or two sources, it's multiple sources. It's several books coming out. We've even had authors on this show talking about it, about, you know, him needing tape at one point, you know, to be able to walk properly, apparently, or know exactly where he was going. And yes, these are allegations, but these are things that are coming out of the White House.
Right.
You know, not something that's completely foreign.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the Jonathan Martin and Amy Parnes book is conducted hundreds of interviews, they said, including people who were in the White House. There's the other book coming out, I'm blanking on the author's name, but they interviewed Ron Klain for that, who was one of Biden's top advisors, his chief of staff at one point, talking about how in that lead up to that debate against Trump, that he was leaving debate prep early to go fall asleep by the pool, that he seemed kind of confused as to whether he was president of the United States or president of NATO. A lot of really concerning things that are really well sourced by the people who have been digging into this post-election. And so I think that is a cop-out for her to say, well, they weren't actually there with Joe Biden, because the sourcing indicates that they were.
Right, and and multiple sources and multiple, as you said, many interviews. Here's what else. If we zoom out for a second, I think so the Democratic Party is watching this too, and they're seeing this tour, so to speak, of him doing more media, and I think they're also saying, why now? We're trying to get our messaging straight. We're trying to get you know, our ducks in a row right now. We're looking at the midterms. We're looking at what's happening with the tariffs. It's actually a moment for the Democratic Party to seize this moment. And then you have him doing these interviews. So I think some are going to be looking at this and saying, hey, hold up, you know, what's going on? And maybe he's just saying, I'm doing it anyway, I'm writing a book, and I want to do this, and I want to preserve, so to speak, my legacy. But it is a good question, why now?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, especially considering there's been reporting that the Bidens want to take over the DNC effectively, that they want to help control messaging, fundraising, the party infrastructure. Going out and doing this View interview and not performing well is not an indication to the Democrats that they want anything to do with that.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting to see how long he goes on these media interviews, or if he's going to cut it short. Will Joe Biden always be with him to help potentially, how he will handle some of these questions going forward, and will there be some members of the Democratic Party who actually vocally say, hey, we need you to kind of take a time out?
Yeah, I'm curious about that too. If there will be people behind the scenes going to him, going to Jill,
or in front, or
saying, publicly,
on X,
yeah,
saying,
stay
like,
away.
Hey, now is not the time.
Yeah,
I'm
there, and I'm sure there will be reporting on that too, because this is I wish there had been more reporting while he was in office, obviously, but I think it's important for the American people now to see the truth of really what was happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, and we saw at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, the media taking, some ownership, some who did take the stage, saying, we should have been better about our reporting. We should have been on top of it when it came to really reporting his cognitive decline. And so, that may, I'm wondering, have prompted the former president to now do this tour. We'll see.
Yeah, could be.
It could be. All right. Well, up next, we've got more to get to. Police suicides in Chicago are at an all-time high. But why is that? Our next guest weighs in. Stay with us.
President Trump declaring that America is open for business after announcing the first of what he says are many trade deals resulting from his Liberation Day tariffs. The president posting this graphic to Truth Social indicating that his new trade deal with the United Kingdom will bring in $6 billion of revenue, keep a 10% tariffs on imports from the country, and create $5 billion in new export opportunities.
This announcement comes as U.S. and Chinese officials announced they would be meeting in Switzerland this weekend. The focus to discuss, of course, lowering the 145% sky-high tariffs. The Chinese were quick to point out that it was the U.S. delegation who asked for the meeting. And here's what else. A report from Axios outlines that economic leaders from around the globe are concerned Trump's tariffs could sink Republicans' chance for the midterms. Axios quoted one investor saying politicians can handle bad headlines and even bad markets for a while, but there will be hell to pay if photos of empty Walmart shelves go viral. The only thing more powerful than loyalty to Trump is wanting to get reelected. Ain't that the truth?
Yeah, so big UK tariff deal coming out. Some of the details of it are interesting. So there is still that 10% baseline tariff, but it looks like they've negotiated on certain industries. So they're going to have a reduction on the tariff rate on U.S. ethanol from 18 to 19%, now coming down to 0. They also have the overall average tariff rate for all UK products that we sell to the UK down to 1.8%, which is where they get that $5 billion in new export opportunities, and then a little bit of rejiggering of the auto tariff as well. It was 25% for UK produced cars. That's coming down, and then they are also reducing the rate on airplane parts in exchange for lower tariffs on the export of Boeing jets and other airplanes to the UK. So a lot of moving parts here.
Yeah, and I love the way you listed it out so folks can get perspective on it. But I know some people might be saying the art of the deal. I think it's the art of distraction. Who was talking about Great Britain? Who was talking about the UK? We've been talking about China. Get us something with China, because we know that that's where Americans are really feeling it. And so, yes, Trump can praise this and he can say we're doing this big thing, but the reality is that Americans are looking at Chinese goods coming in and feeling it. Small businesses are feeling it. The stock market has felt it. We've seen that. We've seen the roiling of just American families feeling uncertain because we don't know the back and forth how this is going to end up. So even those who have retired are looking at their retirement accounts and saying, oh my goodness, what's going on? Can we get some calm? So while I think that, yes, Trump, you may have gotten something here, that's not really what Americans are looking for. They're looking for negotiations happening, and he has called himself a negotiator, right? Look, he did reality TV. We know that story. So people are expecting him to be this master negotiator and to get China to bend. And so we'll see what those talks, if those talks even yield anything in the next coming days or weeks with China. But the reality is that no one was talking about Great Britain. Nobody was talking about that as much.
There is this interesting disconnect where China claims that the U.S. was begging for the meeting and the U.S. claims it's the other way around, that China was begging for it. There have been some initial indicators that this was very damaging to the Chinese economy, as well as the uncertainty with prices in the U.S. China's April economic numbers were down quite significantly, their growth numbers from previous months. American manufacturers say that they've been receiving a lot of orders for component parts and goods in lieu of China providing those. So I do think China is feeling the pressure, which obviously gives the U.S. a good leverage heading into these negotiations this weekend.
So I tend to disagree. I think that China is playing the game. China knows that if you are going to disrupt the supply chain and you're going to ask American businesses to find different products that they've been using, Chinese products for years, that it can take years sometimes to find those replacements. And I think that they know that. They also are very resourceful. They have better technology than we do. I think that there's so many things that China understands they have the higher end, the upper hand on. And I actually think that they're just playing this game. That they want Trump to feel that he messed up and that they're going to make him beg a bit for him to come back. And so that's why I think this is all a distraction. I think this is a distraction. He wants Americans to feel more security. But right now, I think that Americans feel so much, this has stoked so much fear because we don't have the belief that you're going to be able to really bring back these tariffs that you're dealing with China.
I will give you concede a point to a bit in that I think Trump made a mistake with his comments about the dolls and the number of toys that children can own or should have access to in the U.S. I think the more important part of the Chinese tariffs is on those goods that impact national security, things like chips, steel, things like energy, where China has its fingers in all kinds of pies throughout the world. Pharmaceuticals, personal protective equipment, things that we saw the supply chain get cut off on during the pandemic. So if he's able to negotiate deals on those issues and potentially reshore some of those industries, I don't think Americans are as bothered about the cheap goods that are not necessarily necessities or related to national security. But they do want to see us repatriate and reshore those items that we need to be able to develop at home quickly and efficiently and cheaply in order to defend ourselves, protect ourselves in the case of some worldwide catastrophe.
Right, and I think that's true. And then I also think about how women are often the ones who are buying most of the products for their households. They're buying makeup, they're buying all kinds of items. Teenagers now have access to cards. All of this consumption that's happening, and so many goods are coming from China. For those small things like, lash glue and things that people are using all the time. So I agree, there are some higher end items that are going to be important related to national security and those kinds of things, and maybe even technology and computers that are going to cost Americans. But I also think others are going to be feeling it. What else this has done is I think that when you look at not just the tariffs, but what Americans are feeling about the economy in general, domestic travel is down. Those who are coming into the United States, international travelers coming to the United States, wanting to be here, wanting to spend their money here, that's down. People are not having as much faith and optimism when they think about the brand of America. And I think that's been dismissed in this whole conversation, is that people used to look to America because there was so much access. There was the ability to really come to America and know that you were going to enjoy so many parks, right? Then we had the parks, and we had staffers who were no longer working at the parks. There's so many avenues, not just the tariffs I'm talking about, but just the economy in general, where people are not feeling good about America as a brand, and coming to this country and feeling like this is the America that we knew 4 years ago or 5 years ago. Yes, I'll be able to access this park. Yes, I'll be able to travel. Yes, I'll know what things cost. We don't know what things are going to cost in a month.
Yeah, I think there's probably a disparate impact of the tariffs on different groups, though, and just specifically different working and consumer groups. Your point about women is well taken. I think, on the flip side of that, you have a lot of people who work in manufacturing and the unions themselves, like the UAW, coming out in support of a lot of these tariffs because they have seen the disastrous impacts of exporting a lot of our manufacturing processes to other countries. And I do think it's important that the American economy is an economy for all people, right? Not just people who live in the Acela corridor or in LA and work in technology or the service industry, and making sure that there are good jobs, high wage jobs with good benefits for people who don't go to college or don't feel like they need to go to college, people who just have a high school education, who have for a long time developed these skills of working with their hands. And that doesn't mean putting them on a factory line to build Barbies, right? But it does mean, for example, in Mississippi, this is a huge shipbuilding industry. They do a lot of car, auto manufacturing, tires, things like that. So spreading out that ability for people all across the country to have meaningful employment, I think is really important, and really the underlying principle of why Trump is making this move.
And that takes time.
Of course, it does take time, absolutely. All right, still ahead, the pariahs of the civil service. That's how police across the country are describing their job, and it's having deadly consequences. We'll talk about it coming up. Pariahs of the civil service. That's how a retired Chicago police sergeant characterized the public's attitude towards cops, according to the Free Press reporter Olivia Reingold, who spoke with him about the sky-high rate of suicides in the Chicago Police Department.
Reingold says escalating crime and violence, an overworked and underpaid police force, plus dwindling support from the public, have led to a slew of deaths. 53 Chicago cops have sadly taken their lives in the last decade.
After talking with former and current officers, city officials, and mental health advocates, Reingold says they all point to progressive policies that, quote, demoralize and defund the police. Olivia Reingold joins us now. Olivia, thanks for coming on. So let's get right into it, pointing out that those progressive policies are apparently leading to a demoralization for police officers. Can you break down some of those policies that they identified and how they're impacting the day-to-day?
Sure. So at the Free Press, we were able to confirm we got the most exhaustive list yet of the officer suicides that have taken place over the past decade. So previously, the best estimate was around 30 suicides. We were able to find that 53 officers have taken their lives since 2015. And when you look at the data, the rate of suicide nearly doubles after Black Lives Matter. And so when you talk about those policies, it really goes back to the death of Laquan McDonald in 2015. That created this huge infrastructure of oversight and reform, which a lot of cops told me they do support, that the police department is not immune from corruption or bias and that they do support reform. But what they have gotten is at least 6 oversight agencies. There are now 22 civilian councils, one for each police district, to further scrutinize the police department. And there's even a non-citizens advisory council so that non-citizens, regardless of immigration status, can further monitor the police.
You know, I think it's interesting because some folks will look at this and say, well, we do need some oversight. We do need some oversight on police departments, and there's truth to that. But where do you feel in seeing all this reporting, did it go overboard, so to speak?
I think that what has happened to the Chicago Police Department is not rooting out bias. I think it's rooting out all action, not just bias, possibly biased actions, but really anything where cops feel like all they can do is sit in their cars because they have been barred from car chases. And now for the past few years, they've been heavily discouraged from pursuing suspects on foot. And so where did it go wrong? I think that the system became punitive. It became more about punishing the police and kind of milking alleged misconduct for everything it's worth in a total torrent of lawsuits instead of reforming them. And actually, at the Free Press, we were able to uncover a pretty astounding detail, which is that Black Lives Matter has a direct role in shaping oversight for this thing called the consent decree, which is a federal reform mandate. And one of the enforcers of that is Black Lives Matter, which believes in defunding, if not abolishing, the police force. And so, like I said, I think where this whole ecosystem went wrong is it became really punitive and meant to demoralize and really gut the police instead of reform it.
Olivia, one of the other things that I hear from police officers outside of the specific policies is this attitude that has ticked up in popularity of decrying the entire police force as bad, as a negative influence in American life, whether it's through chants like pigs in blankets, fry 'em like bacon, all cops are bad, defund the police. Did any of the officers that you spoke to identify this sort of broader cultural movement as an impetus for the demoralization as well?
Oh, Absolutely. And not just the demoralization, but I mean, the trauma of 2020 looms large for every police officer I spoke with. These are a lot of brave patriots, if I can say, who do not think that the police are perfect. And a lot of the people I spoke with are minorities themselves and have complicated feelings about the police. And during the summer of 2020, they were, I mean, the treatment they described to me was, I guess I knew that this was happening, but it was really hard for them to endure. And especially because it's not, there are parts of that cause that they sympathize with. And this is having a real impact on mental health. I actually was able, it didn't make it into our story, but I was able to find this shocking write-up of this officer who, after, the big thrust, like the height of 2020, it was the following weekend, I think it was in June, he had been working his 12th day in a row, all at least 12-hour shifts, and pulled into his garage, was so exhausted. I guess he had a push to start car. I don't know. I think maybe he accidentally fell asleep, but he had been coming from policing riots, and I guess he fell asleep and the car was loitering, and he accidentally poisoned himself with the fumes and died that way. And so anyway, that didn't make it in, but I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not just, suicides are the most stark example of it. Like that's the ultimate, that's the end here. But there's a huge spectrum in which the ways in which officers are suffering from the stress, physical issues, alcoholism, problems with family members because they feel like their family members don't get them anymore. They feel like the public hates them, that everyone has turned on them. And so this whole atmosphere has really taken a toll on them personally.
Yeah, and Olivia, I worked in small, medium-sized, large cities, and I worked actually the police beat, and I can certainly understand some of what you're saying because you've had direct contact with these police officers and really getting that firsthand account, doing some phenomenal reporting here. Talk about, though, the recruiting, because even in small, medium-sized cities, not as large as Chicago, there is a serious challenge with strong recruits. Can you talk about the ripple effect of not being able to find recruits now because there's just not enough of a draw to become a police officer?
Totally. So Chicago, like most police forces in most major cities, is having a staffing crisis. I believe the count is that they're about 2,000 officers short of where they would like to be and previous staffing levels. And that's not unusual. I think almost every major police department in the country is really taxed, and they are relying on overtime shifts because of this. And so officers themselves, it's kind of a catch-22 because a lot of them feel like they need to take these overtime shifts. I mean, sometimes they're pressured to, their days off have been canceled, and the day just they have it continues with overtime. But that is further making the police force, it's a huge struggle because then the officers who are on the job are exhausted themselves, and so you're not necessarily getting the best out of the officers that you already have. But yeah, a lot of police departments, because they are so understaffed, are relying on overtime to get by.
All right, Olivia, thank you so much for your insightful reporting. We look forward to having you back on the show.
President Trump is opening up another dividing line within the conservative movement. His latest pick for Surgeon General, wellness influencer Dr. Casey Means, is reaping both praise and ridicule.
Trump had initially chosen Dr. Janet Neshwat for the role, but he seemingly switched gears at the last minute. The president took to Truth Social and wrote, "Casey has impeccable MAHA credentials and will work closely with our wonderful Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., to ensure successful implementation of our agenda in order to reverse the chronic disease epidemic and ensure great health in the future for all Americans. Some on the right are not as enthusiastic, however. They've attacked her credentials and spiritual practices. Political commentator Richard Hanania called her a, quote, lunatic who will do serious damage to public health. He continued writing, she'll be the first occupant of the office to believe in using spiritual mediums, praying to ancestor shrines, doing full moon ceremonies to amplify her dreams, asking the trees in the forest to deliver her a hunky man, being a shroom head, and praising indigenous wisdom.
Meanwhile, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. wrote, "The attacks that Casey is unqualified because she left the medical system completely miss the point of what we are trying to accomplish with MAHA. Casey is the perfect choice for Surgeon General precisely because she left the traditional medical system, not in spite of it."
Podcaster David Pakman wrote on Blue Sky, the new Surgeon General pick is Dr. Casey Mean. She left clinical medicine, pushes biohacking to influencers, and hates public health standards. Quite the MAGA loyalty test.
This is really interesting to see the different sides of MAGA battling this out. You've had Laura Loomer being very against Dr. Casey Means, Richard Hanania, which we referenced in the opening, and then a lot of the MAHA adjacent people very excited about this pick. And I think there's good and bad here. The spiritual stuff to me, the praying to trees, is very odd. But I appreciate her perspective on nutrition as a driving factor of the chronic illness epidemic, of helping with metabolism rates and things like that. So definitely a very mixed bag. I'm not sure she's 100% a quack, but there's definitely some concerning things in here as well.
Right, she doesn't have an active medical license. She didn't finish her residency. I also find it odd and you know, something that should be a red flag here. On her website, actually, I looked and it said she's not able to comment on specific medical conditions or provide any medical guidance, and yet here she is going to be America's top doctor, which is typically a position we see high-ranking military, like they've served in a high-ranking military position. I know that Trump doesn't always go with the traditions here, and he bucks back at it, but when you look at that, you have someone on their website saying we don't give guidance, medical guidance, and the Surgeon General, what they're tasked with often doing is putting actually guidance on things like tobacco products. So they're actually giving us guidance to the American public on what not to do. So I find this, you know, just ridiculous.
To be fair, I do think the Surgeon General's role is more in sharing guidance that's been developed by the agencies, right? They're not a lone wolf. They're not the Pope speaking ex cathedra. So I think that matters here. But getting into the broader debate over the MAHA movement and some of the pushback on the public health bureaucracy, I mean, I do think that this is something that has built a new coalition within the Republican Party and among conservatives because of what they saw as overreach during the COVID pandemic and of a lot of decisions made by people who had a lot of expertise or a lot of experience in the health industry who later admitted that that guidance wasn't really backed by science. Dr. Deborah Birx, for example, saying that the 6 feet social distancing rule was not really based on any real scientific guidance, but they just kind of had to pick a number so that it sounded good to people, or the 15 days to slow the spread, which was, again, another arbitrary choice. And there was a lot of misinformation around the effectiveness of masks, of the effectiveness of lockdowns, of the impact on vaccines and whether they could prevent you from getting or spreading the virus. And so all of this distrust in the public health bureaucracy has led us to this moment where I think the MAHA movement has allowed some people in who don't have the high-ranking credentials and maybe have a lot of alternative ideas that seem crazy on their face, but people are looking and saying, well, is it really that much more crazy than what we had to go through in 2020?
Sure, and there are people who think that way, right? I think there's others who say, well, if you're going to be America's top doctor, that's the title, doctor. You didn't finish residency. You don't have the credentials. And I think that often is a sticking point that many conservatives bring up is, well, you don't need to have those things. But people had those things prior to Trump being in office and Trump's camp and Trump's team. There was the belief that you had to have credentials, even if you believed in non-traditional medicine, which many Americans do, right? There are even aspects of it that I believe in. It doesn't mean that I want the one who is tasked with putting warning labels on tobacco products, on alcohol, to not have the credentials, to not have gone through and finished residency, to not have an active medical license. So I think that there's a balance to it, right? But what are we saying to future generations? You don't have to have anything to be America's top doctor. You don't have to have the credentials. So, there's always going to be those who say that and point to COVID as being, the lane of where we made many mistakes. And I'm not disputing that there were mistakes that were made by those who did have credentials, but that doesn't mean that it's a free ticket to then override everyone who does. And I think that's a foolish mistake to make. I think you have to look at it case by case versus looking at it as like a blanket statement, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I do think there's a difference between throwing someone in who has no medical experience whatsoever versus someone who did go to medical school, didn't leave the residency until very close to the end, and has talked about her reasons for doing so, where she felt like there was a complete rejection of nutrition as an important element in determining health outcomes. And then her medical license was active until January of 2024. So she was a practicing doctor for some time and actually guiding patients. So I don't think it's quite as black and white as, well, she doesn't have the credentials.
I'll concede on some of that.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, coming up, New York Attorney General Letitia James in trouble with the FBI. That story up next. Stay with us here. Well, as President Trump seeking revenge, per multiple reports, the FBI and U.S. Attorney's Office in Albany are now investigating New York Attorney General Letitia James over alleged mortgage fraud.
The Albany Times-Union first reported the news. The U.S. Attorney of New York's Northern District, John Sarcone III, is President Trump's ally. Here's Trump earlier this week.
Well, I don't want to get involved in something that Pamela's involved with. She's a disaster for New York. She's a horrible, horrible human being. And I think she's a total crook. There's no question about it. But that's just my opinion. Pam's going to have to do what she wants. She's a very bad person. She's a very, very bad person who campaigned solely on, I'm going to get Donald Trump over and over again.
James says that the DOJ hasn't formally told her they are investigating her. Here she is on MSNBC last night. Take a listen.
You see, this is nothing more than an extension of his revenge, his retribution, and he finally got up to the J's. And so I stand prepared to respond to these baseless attacks with facts.
Well, it certainly is making the news cycle. So this is what a lot of folks are talking about, is this case. What are your thoughts on it?
I think she's in a lot of trouble, honestly. This was first reported by White Collar Fraud 2 days before the initial referral letter was sent by a member of the Trump administration in the housing department, and now the FBI has opened this official probe, but the evidence does not look good in her favor. She allegedly lied on mortgage documents in order to get more favorable terms, including claiming that she was going to be the principal resident, or this was going to be her principal residence in Norfolk, Virginia, and which is against New York law, because in order to serve as Attorney General, you have to have your principal residence in New York. And then that also allowed her to get a more favorable mortgage rate. And so if she did say this on the mortgage documents and it's in writing, she has a big problem there.
Yeah, and I think that she's, saying, and her attorney is speaking out for her now, of course, since it's going into the legal battle, that it was for her niece, that she was like setting up her niece inside of that home. Either way, it does look fishy because, President Trump for years, at least 2018, even during her run for state attorney general, he has spewed vitriol at her. She has said during her campaign that she was going to go after Trump, just like he said he's going to go after certain things in campaigning. And one of the things that she said, or that came out of that, was that she did go after, she sued the Trump organization. She won a huge case. I believe it was like $450 million. So she has had success in holding up some of his initiatives related to Social Security and other things. And he's not gonna really like that. So it does look fishy, right? And ironically, it's part of what she was, the case that she was building against Trump was related to going back to fraudulent claims and related to bank documents and so forth, as it relates to apparently a fraud scheme that was going on. So it does raise eyebrows here that he's now going after her, someone he has disliked for years. He's going after, ironically, some similar things that's related to documents and banking and loan terms, some of the same things that a Supreme Court justice, and I quote, blatantly false financial data was pointed out in the case by Supreme Court justice with the case that went after Trump. So I do think it raises eyebrows. There's no question about it. And we'll see it play out in court, right? We'll see if this, how it goes through. But it does raise eyebrows, just the irony of it all.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the irony is in the hypocrisy of if you're going after somebody for alleged fraud in, she claimed he was overvaluing his properties in order to secure more favorable loan terms. There was the sticking point in that case that became viral was the idea that Mar-a-Lago was only worth $18 million. So then to turn around and be apparently committing mortgage fraud, allegedly committing mortgage fraud by claiming this was her principal residence, if her niece is the one that she's trying to secure this house for, then she can't claim to be the person who is living there full time in order to get a better mortgage rate. That's fraud. And so if she was going after Trump on that case and then doing the same thing effectively herself, I mean, nobody should be above the law. That's what people like to say about Trump all the time. Even someone who's running for president shouldn't be above the law. The president himself shouldn't be above the law. Letitia James is not above the law either.
Well, right, and I think that her attorney is now speaking out saying that that was a mistake and that there's other documents that were also put in that, showed that it's for the niece. So that's why I say we'll see much of this play out in court. But clearly, it does paint the picture of political retribution. It does appear to be political retribution. We'll see if it plays out again, whether she ends up winning or he ends up winning. But the fact that she's been able to hold up his initiatives and impact millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, he's not going to take too kindly to that. And we just heard him. We just heard him, again, saying you're a bad person. I mean, look, even if he felt that way, you are the president of the United States. You are saying bad person. Leave it to the courts. If you really believe in it, why do you have to also disparage someone publicly?
I mean, she did the same thing, though, right?
Saying bad, you are the president of the United States saying bad person. Like, come on. I mean, it just sounds ridiculous, him repeating himself saying that. Now, again, he could be right, she could be wrong. It's just, you're the president. Where's the decorum? Where's, there used to be that the president of the United States wouldn't come out, even if there was a court case, wouldn't come out and then disparage the person. Let it play out in the courts. You believe in what you're doing? Let it play out in the courts. So I just, I think it's distasteful.
You're fine to think that way. I mean, I think Americans in electing Trump twice sort of sent a message that they weren't really interested in that style of presidency anymore. They wanted someone who was perceived as a fighter. And I'm not sure it's fair to say that this is political retribution when you have someone who started her case against Trump with political retribution. I mean, saying on the campaign trail that you're going to go after Trump, you're allowed to say that, but does that not give the perception that you are looking at a person and then searching for a crime rather than finding a crime and then investigating and holding the person accountable, right? It's supposed to go that direction when you are a law enforcement official.
Sure, but by that point in time, there were many things that she could have, there were things that even other states were pursuing and she could join in. It wasn't like it was just her. It wasn't just her. There were other states that were also pursuing lawsuits that they did join in on. In fairness to her, I think that she campaigned on going after those who were doing fraud. She found him to what? Do fraud. She won the case.
Right, but she that's the point, is she campaigned on going after people for fraud, but she specifically looked at a target rather than finding the fraud first and then going to Trump.
Well, we go through sources all the time when you're finding if this something has been in the media. Again, you were the president of the United States. You're not somebody who's walking down the street here. You were the president of the United States. If this is something that has been brought to your attention and you're the president of the United States, that's part of your responsibility as an attorney general. That's what I would argue. I see your point, but I don't agree with it.
The Daily Caller News Foundation sent a couple of reporters down to these homes that Letitia James has in Virginia to see if she was there or if the people who lived there knew her. And I'm sure it wouldn't be surprising you to hear that they did not want to talk to the media. There were neighbors who said that they had never seen Letitia James or anyone who looked like her in the vicinity. The residents of the home falsely accused the reporters of trespassing on their property. So I am not sure if that's going to play into the case at all in terms of their reporting, but it does suggest that, again, the document does say principal resident, and so I think that's going to be the problem, where even if the lawyer claims that she meant to do it for her niece, that doesn't get around the fact that she wrote it on the document, even in error, right? I mean, that's just like if we're talking about Trump, the case of the Stormy Daniels document, right? They or the Stormy Daniels payments. They said that the issue was it was a clerical error where it was labeled as legal expenses and maybe it should have been campaign expenses. They referred to it as a bookkeeping error. That obviously didn't pass muster for him. I doubt the same will be true for Letitia James.
Well, right, and we'll have to see how many documents, you know, the niece was on. Was it really just one out of the whatever they make you sign? You know, if you ever sign a mortgage document, it's like, you know, a huge pile. We don't really know all of the answers yet. I think a lot of this is also the court of public opinion that will be playing some of this, and like you mentioned, reporters going to the home of Letitia James, the multiple homes potentially. So we'll have to see how this all plays out. But I do think it's interesting that it just happens to be within, to your point, kind of the same realm. We're looking at banking documents and loans and potential fraud. So we'll see, of course, how all of this plays out. There's certainly more to come on that story. Also coming up, Trump plucks another Fox News host to join his administration. She's best known as Judge Jeanine Pirro.
Another Fox News host is set to join the Trump administration. President Trump tapped the 5 co-host Jeanine Pirro to serve as interim U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. The president announced this on his Truth Social account Thursday, posting, quote, Jeanine is incredibly well qualified for this position and is considered one of the top district attorneys in the history of the state of New York. She is in a class by herself. Congratulations, Jeanine.
She sat at Fox's anchor desk for 14 years after becoming a household name on court TV show Judge Jeanine Pirro. Prior to co-hosting, she served as assistant DA in New York's Westchester County, then went on to serve as county judge. She was the first, by the way, woman elected to those positions there. Reactions are pouring in. Left-leaning lawyer Tristan Snell, who prosecuted the Trump University case, said, quote, how many more TV hosts is Trump going to put in serious positions they are unqualified for? This is the U.S. government, not the celebrity apprentice.
South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham applauded the move, writing on X, quote, grand slam, home run, hat trick pick. I am beyond pleased with President Trump's decision. So this came after a big fight over Ed Martin, who was the acting, or still is, I guess, at this current moment, the U.S. District Attorney for Washington, D.C. One of the sticking points for him was that he did not have prior prosecutorial experience, and Senator Tom Tillis from North Carolina said that he would not vote to advance his confirmation beyond the Senate Judiciary Committee, which basically made his nomination dead on arrival. And that was when Trump opted to pick another person for that position, because if the time had run out for a nomination, the law states that the judge, which in this case is Judge James Boasberg, who hasn't been particularly friendly to the Trump administration, ruling against them on the Alien Enemies Act, would get to choose the person to fill that vacancy until Trump picked another candidate. So he really was up against the clock on this one.
Mm-hmm. And look, they've known each other for many years. I think it's interesting that she has not practiced, or I should say held a law enforcement job in 2 decades. You know, we know her ex-husband, her former husband, that Trump back in, I believe it was the year 2000, pardoned him, conviction of conspiracy and tax evasion. So they've got a deep friendship that goes back, that involves her ex-husband. She's also been a backer of that whole 2020 election, you know, really spewing some of the claims that we heard on Fox that, you know, is this legitimate? Then Fox had to settle that, you know, some of their hosts were wrong about that, you know, really disputing that 2020 election and that whole theory. So she's backed Trump in a number of ways. She's proved herself, we know, as a loyalist, and Trump loves a staunch supporter. And she's done that really well. And this is maybe his way of rewarding her, but it's also her way of helping him out too, because as you point out, the clock was ticking.
Yeah, I think the important thing for me is that Washington, D.C. has had a serious crime issue in the past decade, particularly following 2020. They were one of the slowest to recover from the crime spike related to the pandemic and the 2020 summer of riots. And she is a very tough on crime prosecutor, evidenced by her time as district attorney back in New York. She was very well respected in that position. As you mentioned, the first woman to be elected to that role. Ed Martin took a very similar posture to that issue. According to sources in law enforcement who spoke to the Daily Caller, prior to Ed Martin taking over, the prior attorney that was chosen by Joe Biden only did not prosecute 67% of cases that came across his desk. That completely did a 180 under Ed Martin. He was prosecuting 65% of cases. I think we'll see very similar things from Judge Jeanine Pirro. And Tom Tillis has already said that he intends to support her confirmation as well.
Yeah, she has not been, I think important for the public to know, she has not been lawfully appointed. There's a cycle of this 120 days, and there's a timing to all of this, and, Trump selected her. So we'll see how things play out. And is he also, on a bigger picture, is he sidestepping having to get confirmation on her by doing the interim, and then how long will she be interim? So there's a lot of, I think, things that because of the way this has played out, there is a potential for criminal defendants to say, well, she wasn't the one during the time that I was maybe, in the court process. And so and she hasn't been appointed, so they could potentially have a case where they could say, we want it thrown out. Potential criminal defendants who are right now facing potential trials. So we'll see how that plays out even from that lens, which I think hasn't been talked about as much as the impact of this for criminal defendants. It is interesting, though. Another Fox News host, I kind of sighed at the beginning of this because it's like another one. I mean, are we really just going to Fox News and just plucking people left and right? She's leaving, obviously, a lucrative TV position that she's been in for many years. I just think it's becoming to look like Fox News, and you are getting a lot of people who don't have necessarily the credentials that we've seen in the past. And we know that we mentioned earlier in the show, he bucks tradition in the way he selects people a lot of times, and a lot of his fan base enjoys that. But it is beginning to be a little bit like, okay, we get that you love Fox News, but come on.
She does have decades of prosecutorial experience, though. I mean, you could make the argument, well, she hasn't done it in a while. But
she's done it in 2 decades.
But she did serve in those roles for decades as well. And again, her career was very well respected. I think the Fox News thing is a little bit of a red herring because there are a lot of Democratic officials who cycle in and out of cable news jobs to join administrations. Jim Sciutto is an example of that. He served under Obama. Now he's a CNN anchor, supposedly on the hard news side. Jen Psaki and Simone Sanders both left the Biden administration to join MSNBC. I think we would be naive to think that if a future Democratic administration...
But it's reversed.
It goes the other way as well.
Yeah,
of course.
But
I mean, it was a classic cable news to government rotating cycle,
Influence.
revolving door. So I don't think this is at all unique to the Trump administration. The other element of this that is quite interesting is that Ed Martin is not straight up leaving the administration. He's been appointed to a different position that does not require Senate confirmation. He will go to the DOJ as the new director of the Weaponization Working Group and the Associate Deputy Attorney General, as well as the pardon attorney, which does seem like a bit of a thumb in the eye to Tom Tillis, because Tom Tillis's objection was that Ed Martin was too kind in defending some of the January 6 rioters and people who trespassed at the Capitol that day. And he said, if he were being appointed to any other district or state or anything, then I would support him. But because it's in D.C. where the Capitol riot took place, that's why I can't support his nomination. So now going to pardon attorney, where he would actually have even more jurisdiction over those choices of more power to give to advise the president on who he gives pardons to. Trump is clearly saying, I'm still sticking with Ed Martin. He can't get confirmed, so I have really no choice but to put him somewhere else. But he's not leaving by any means.
Well, right, and we have seen how Trump understands politics and positioning and what he needs confirmation on and timelines so thoroughly compared to the first term. We've seen that I think his understanding of how government works was, lacking. Of course, he hadn't been in government before in the first term, and you can see in this term, he really understood, which is why I think he's moving at speed with so many initiatives, but he's understanding who he can put where and whether he needs Senate confirmation and the timelines with that. And maybe he has better advisors too, I'm not sure, who are giving him a little bit more detail on what you can and can't do, but it seems like he's getting some more wins in his column when it comes to that, right? He's understanding exactly who, to your point, who he can put where and what kind of authority is needed to approve it. So I think we're just going to see more of this going forward. I think we're probably going to see more Fox News personalities, probably in really high up positions potentially. And so this is, to me, the start. We're not even 6 months in, which is pretty crazy.
It's been a whirlwind. I mean, one of the things with the Fox News host that I think I see shaping out or playing out in this administration is that when he's in these, looking at these top level positions, he does want someone who can be on message, who can present well on TV and basically make the case on behalf of the administration as a means of combating what he sees as media bias from the establishment or legacy media. And then in the positions underneath those people, he has people with more experience, who know the ins and outs of the departments, who maybe have legal experience and are basically actually the ones pulling the levers and running the departments and the agencies, while the person at top is really more of a public-facing spokesperson.
Yeah, or a puppet, depending on how you look at it. So,
well,
yeah.
I would say that people who serve under the president should be committed to executing his agenda.
I agree with that. Yep, I agree with that. All right.
Up next, one of the world's richest men is giving up all of his wealth. Stick with us for that on Rising. Billionaire Bill Gates is giving away all of his money. Well, sort of. Microsoft co-founder Gates announced that he intends to give away 99% of his fortune over the next 20 years and close his nonprofit, the Gates Foundation, by the end of 2045. Gates wrote in a blog post Thursday, "People will say a lot of things about me when I die, but I am determined that he died rich will not be one of them. There are too many urgent problems to solve for me to hold on to resources that could be used to help people."
Gates also took shots at Elon Musk, saying Doge is killing children through U.S. aid cuts. He told Financial Times, quote, "The picture of the world's richest man killing the world's poorest children is not a pretty one." Gates also cited the grants that Musk canceled in Gaza and Mozambique. "I'd love for him to go in and meet the children that have now been infected with HIV because he cut that money."
All right, so Bill
Yeah.
Gates giving away most of his fortune. I mean, that's fine. He's welcome to do that.
His money.
Yeah, I mean, I also don't hold any grudge towards people who choose to pass that on to their kids or have a charitable foundation that they keep open for their family members. But there's obviously a lot of reactions to this in regards to his comments on Doge, seemingly inspired by Doge to give up this money to private charity sources so that he can combat some of the government cuts. What are your thoughts on his comments there?
Well, look, the reality is that, since the Trump administration has come into office, right, since January, we have seen U.S. aid completely almost dwindle down to nothing, from 10,000 people to eventually will be 15 positions in this role. And what this means is a lot of what Bill Gates is saying is that some of the most vulnerable, malnourished children, mothers, we're talking about HIV treatment, we're talking about polio dollars, we're talking about resources for water resources around the world. So many people, millions, are impacted by this move. And so I think he's trying to give a reality check to Doge and the Elon Musk camp that, hey, have you looked in the face of a child who will now not survive because they don't have the proper treatment? So I think that he's trying to say, I've seen what this will impact, and you all are just kind of cutting numbers and cutting people and programs. Look, 83% of the programs for U.S. aid are now going to be cut. And the detrimental impact is what I think Bill Gates is trying to tell him you need to be aware of. Or do you even care?
Where Americans get frustrated, though, is that the federal budget has been skyrocketing year after year after year. Obviously, the federal debt has been increasing as well. And yet they walk down their city block and they see homeless people everywhere. They see homeless veteran suicides at an all-time high, and they say, we need to get our priorities in check, right? America would love to help the world, but maybe we need to have a priority on helping people at home, making sure that working class people are not overly burdened by tax increases. And so there is an appetite for cutting the government. I mean, 70-something% of people, according to the latest poll, do agree with cutting government bureaucracy, cutting government spending. So then the question gets into how do you actually do that and what is the right way? And I think a lot of people feel like they're willing to give Doge some latitude in how they institute these cuts.
Yeah,
sure. And
some, they've just, let's be fair, they've come in and put out emails, we're abolishing your department, So yeah, okay, there's problems here at home too. But the reality is that America, you cannot compare the poverty somebody feels here, and I'm sorry, to what you would feel in Africa. You have access here. You can walk into a homeless shelter if you are homeless here. Maybe people don't choose to, right? But there is an incredible amount of access here. So the comparison to me is also lost on a lot of people of the amount of suffering someone is going through.
Yeah, but I think that's probably little comfort to the person who's camped out on a street corner, right? I mean, and you can go into a homeless shelter, but what do you really get? Do you get long-term access to housing? Do you get mental health treatment? Do you get drug addiction treatment? A lot of that does come from private charitable sources, which is great. I'm in no way knocking private charity.
Churches, missionaries.
Yeah, I mean, the Catholic Church in particular is the largest charitable organization in the world. They help a lot of these international issues as well that you're referencing. But when people see their tax dollars going out the door every year, 30%, 40%, sometimes even higher, and they still see the issue of poverty in the United States, they say, well, that's my fellow countrymen. Right. I want to assist them first.
Totally, and I would go to then there's also systemic things that need to be changed too in how we address it. The other thing that I'll say is that, again, I'm not saying necessarily that every single U.S. aid program and every single U.S. aid position needed to be there, but to dwindle it down this fast. Congress has not even approved the reorganization. To do things at this speed, why? Why does it have to be done this fast? So, okay, some people disagree with the amount of people that are cut. Okay, why can't we do it through the right chain of command? Why the speed?
Well, I think one of the problems is that we have had this recurring bureaucratic bloat for so many years. The Republicans are probably not going to keep the House in the midterms. Right now, they have a mandate to do these cuts, and they're on a timeline of about 18 months. So I think that's the reason for the rapidity of which this is happening.
And I'll add this before we wrap up on this topic. You know, the government is not the same as running a business, and that's how Elon Musk is treating it, like one of his businesses. There are programs that don't necessarily bring in money. And that's part of what we're challenged to do in the government. So just want to point that out.
That's going to do it for us today on Rising. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts.